Sign the divorce papers and get the hell out of my house, you useless parasite. Richard Cross did not just hand me the documents. He threw the thick stack of legal papers directly at my face. The sharp corner of the folder struck my cheekbone, creating a stinging sensation that felt like a paper cut slicing through my skin. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I simply stood there, in the middle of the expansive marble living room of the Manhattan penthouse, feeling the metallic taste of blood inside my mouth. "Are you deaf?" Richard roared, his voice echoing off the cold walls. He marched toward me, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking aggressively on the floor. "Sarah is pregnant. My son needs a proper home, not a cramped apartment. He needs this penthouse, and he certainly does not need a barren, poverty-stricken woman like you haunting the hallways." Sarah, his secretary, sat on the velvet sofa, sipping a glass of vintage red wine that I had bought for our anniversary. She smirked, her hand resting protectively over her perfectly flat stomach. "Don't be difficult, Elena," Sarah said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Richard has been generous enough to let you stay here for 3 years, but let's be honest, you don't belong in this world. You are just a charity case that expired." I looked at the grandfather clock standing in the corner. The pendulum swung rhythmically. Tick, tock. It was 11:59 at night. Just one more minute. "Why are you staring at the clock? You freak!" Richard grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to leave a bruise. He shoved me backward. My lower back collided with the edge of the glass table, sending a jolt of sharp pain shooting up my spine. I said, "Sign it, now. Or do I have to call security to drag you out like the trash you are?" "You promised," I whispered, my voice steady despite the throbbing pain in my back. "You promised my aunt you would take care of me for at least 5 years. Your aunt is a dying old woman in a nursing home," Richard sneered, looming over me. "And you are a liar. You told me you would be a good wife, but look at you. You dress like a maid. You act like a mute. You add zero value to my image. I need a wife who can stand beside a CEO, not someone who looks like she should be scrubbing the toilets." The clock chimed. Dong. Midnight. The 12th chime resonated through the room, signaling the start of a new day. October 15th. The exact date my grandfather's will stipulated. The 3-year probation period required for me to inherit the sterling global empire was officially over. The shackle was broken. The masquerade was finished. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive cologne and betrayal. The pain in my cheek and back seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. "Okay," I said. My voice changed. It was no longer the soft, submissive whisper of a housewife. It was the icy, commanding tone of a woman who controlled billions. Richard blinked, confused by the sudden shift in my demeanor. "What did you say?" I bent down and picked up the divorce papers from the floor. I walked over to the mahogany desk, ignoring the throbbing ache in my leg. I grabbed a pen. I flipped to the last page. I signed my name with a flourish. Not the shaky signature of a frightened wife, but the bold, aggressive signature of a predator. "I signed," I said, tossing the papers onto the table. "Now, according to property laws, since you are kicking me out without notice, I will take my personal belongings." "Take whatever rags you have," Richard laughed, pouring himself a drink. "Just don't touch anything valuable. Security is waiting downstairs to search your bag." I walked to the closet near the entrance. I did not pack clothes. I did not pack jewelry. I simply put on my trench coat and reached into the hidden pocket of my old handbag. My fingers curled around a black titanium phone, a device I had not turned on in 1,095 days. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up. Immediately, hundreds of notifications flooded in, messages from bank executives, global leaders, and my private legal team. "Leaving so soon?" Sarah called out, mocking me. "Don't you want to say goodbye? Maybe beg for some cab money?" I turned around, for the first time in 3 years. I looked Richard directly in the eyes. I did not lower my gaze. I stared at him with such intensity that he actually took a step back, his glass of whiskey pausing midair. "Enjoy the penthouse tonight, Richard," I said, a small, dangerous smile playing on my lips. "Because the weather forecast says a storm is coming, and you forgot to read the fine print." "Get out!" Richard shouted, throwing his glass at the door. It shattered inches from my feet. Shards of crystal flew everywhere. I stepped out into the rain. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, sealing my past inside. The storm outside was brutal. Rain lashed against the pavement like whips. I stood on the sidewalk, wet and shivering, looking like a discarded stray dog. A security guard from the building, a man Richard had tipped to harass me, smirked as he watched me. "Need a cardboard box, lady," he jeered. Suddenly, blinding headlights cut through the darkness. A convoy of 5 black SUVs tore down the street. Ignoring all traffic laws, they screeched to a halt right in front of me. The lead car was a custom-made Rolls-Royce Phantom, flying a small flag with the Sterling family crest. The security guard dropped his flashlight. His jaw hit the floor. 4 men in tactical suits jumped out of the escort vehicles, forming a protective wall around me. They held umbrellas that shielded me instantly from the rain. The rear door of the Rolls-Royce opened. An older man in an impeccable tuxedo stepped out. He bowed 90 degrees, ignoring the mud splashing onto his polished shoes. "Welcome back, Madam Chairwoman," Lucas said, his voice trembling with reverence. "The board of directors is waiting, and we have activated the scorched earth protocol as you instructed." I slid into the warm leather seat of the car. I looked out the tinted window, up at the penthouse balcony where Richard and Sarah were likely toasting to their victory. "Lucas," I said, my voice low and terrifying, "buy this building. Tonight. I want them evicted before breakfast." "Yes, madam," Lucas replied. "And what about Mr. Cross's company?" "Kill it," I ordered. "Liquidate everything. I want him to wake up owning nothing but the suit on his back." The car accelerated, disappearing into the New York night, leaving the old Elena behind in the gutter. The game had just begun. I need a cashier's check for $500,000. Now. And tell your teller to stop looking at me like I am speaking a foreign language. Richard Cross slammed his black American Express Centurion card onto the marble counter of Sterling Bank's main branch on Fifth Avenue. He adjusted his silk tie, glancing impatiently at his Patek Philippe watch. Beside him, Sarah clung to his arm, feigning shyness but eyeing the vault door with greedy anticipation. She whispered something about the diamond ring they had just reserved at Tiffany's, her voice high and grating against the hushed, professional atmosphere of the bank. "I am sorry, Mr. Cross," the teller said. Her face was pale, her eyes darting to the computer screen. She did not touch the black card. She kept her hands folded on her lap, a sign of defensive body language that Richard, in his arrogance, completely missed. "I cannot process this transaction." "What do you mean you cannot?" Richard leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing growl that he reserved for underperforming employees. "The account has over $10 million in liquid assets. Do not tell me the system is down. I am a priority client. Fix it." "It is not a system error, sir," the teller replied, her voice trembling slightly but remaining firm. "Your access code has been revoked. The account is frozen pending an internal audit." Frozen. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Richard let out a short, incredulous laugh. He looked around the lobby, ensuring other customers were watching him. This was his stage. He enjoyed belittling service workers in public. It made him feel powerful. Frozen by who? Richard demanded, his voice rising in volume. I am the CEO of Cross Enterprises. I demand to see the branch manager, immediately, or I will have your job and your supervisor's job by lunchtime. Sarah tugged at his sleeve, looking nervous. Richard, maybe there is a mistake. Let's just call your lawyer. Quiet, Richard snapped, shaking her off. This is incompetence, pure and simple. The glass doors of the executive office swung open. A tall man with graying hair and a sharp, bespoke suit walked out. It was Arthur Henderson, the regional director of Sterling Bank. Richard smirked. He knew Henderson. They had played golf together at the Hamptons Country Club. This was how business was done in America. A handshake, a laugh, and the rules would be bent. Arthur, Richard called out, spreading his arms wide. Thank God you are here. Your staff is incompetent. They are telling me my money is frozen. Tell this girl to cut the check so I can leave. Henderson did not smile. He did not extend his hand. He walked straight past Richard as if Richard were invisible, a ghost haunting the lobby. The brush-off was so cold, so deliberate, that Richard stood frozen, his arms still spread in an awkward embrace of empty air. Ah, Arthur, Richard said, his tone shifting from arrogance to confusion. Henderson stopped at the center of the lobby, turned his back to Richard, and bowed his head slightly toward the massive steel door of the private VIP vault area. The heavy circular door, which usually required 2 keys and a retina scan to open, began to rotate. The gears ground together with a low, heavy hum that vibrated through the floor. Director Henderson, Richard shouted, his face turning red. I am talking to you. Look at me when I speak. Mr. Cross, Henderson said, finally turning around. His voice was devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a corporate executioner. Please lower your voice. You are disturbing the chairman. Chairman what? Chairman, Richard spat. I don't care if the President of the United States is in there. I want my money. The vault door swung open fully. Inside, sitting on a single velvet chair in the center of the steel room, was a woman. She was not wearing the faded cotton dress she wore yesterday. She was dressed in a sharp, white power suit that cost more than Richard's car. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was now cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders. She held a glass of sparkling water, looking at a stack of documents with bored indifference. Richard squinted. The silhouette was familiar. The posture was familiar. But the aura was alien. This person radiated absolute authority. The woman looked up. It was Elena. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His knees buckled slightly. Sarah let out a gasp, her hand covering her mouth. Elena, Richard whispered. Then, his shock turned into a twisted form of fury. He marched forward, ignoring the security line. What the hell are you doing in the bank vault? Did you break in? Are you insane? 2 large security guards in dark suits stepped into his path instantly. They did not push him. They simply stood there, solid walls of muscle, blocking his access to the woman inside. Step back, sir. One guard said. His hand hovered near his taser. Elena stood up slowly. She walked out of the vault, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. She stopped 3 feet away from the security line, looking at Richard as one would look at a bug under a microscope. Mr. Henderson, Elena said. Her voice was calm, melodic, and terrifyingly cold. Why is this non-client shouting in my lobby? My apologies, Madam Chairman, Henderson replied, bowing again. We were just escorting him out. Chairman Richard choked on the word. He looked from Henderson to Elena, his brain struggling to process the information. Arthur, why are you calling my wife chairman? She is a housewife. She doesn't even have a college degree. Actually, Elena interrupted, crossing her arms. I have a double master's degree from Wharton and a doctorate in international finance from Harvard. I just chose not to hang them on the walls of your tacky penthouse. She took a step closer. And as for the chairman title, you really should have done your research. Richard, this bank is called Sterling Bank. My name is Elena Sterling. Did you think Sterling was just a common middle name? Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The connection slammed into him like a freight train. Sterling Global, the Sterling family, one of the oldest, wealthiest banking dynasties in New York. And he had treated the heiress of that empire like a servant for 3 years. No, Richard stammered. That is impossible. Your aunt. She lived in a nursing home in Queens. A private facility I own, Elena corrected. She was acting. We all were. It was a test. Richard, a test of character. And you failed so spectacularly that it is almost impressive. My money. Richard grasped at the only straw he had left. You froze my money. You can't do that. That is illegal. I will sue you. Elena laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. She signaled Henderson. The director handed her a document. It is not illegal if you agreed to it, Elena said, holding up the paper. Do you recognize this? It is the loan agreement you signed last year to expand your factory. Clause 14. Section B. The bank reserves the right to freeze all associated personal assets if the borrower is under investigation for moral turpitude or fraud. I am not under investigation, Richard screamed. You are now, Elena replied. She tossed the document at his feet. I just filed a report with the IRS and the SEC regarding some irregularities in your company's tax filings. Until the investigation is complete, which could take years, your accounts are locked. You have $0. Richard, your credit cards are dead. Your car lease is void. Richard looked at Sarah. Sarah was backing away, her eyes wide with panic. She realized the ring was never going to happen. She realized the penthouse was gone. Elena, wait, Richard said, his voice cracking. He tried to switch tactics, forcing a pathetic smile onto his face. Honey, let's talk about this. We are married. We can fix this. I was stressed. Sarah, she means nothing. It was just a moment of weakness. A moment of weakness that lasted 2 years. Elena raised an eyebrow. Save your breath. You are trespassing on private property. She turned to the guards. Remove him, she ordered. And if he resists, assume he is a threat to the bank's security. I authorize the use of necessary force. You can't do this, Richard yelled as the guards grabbed his arms. The grip was iron tight. They did not drag him roughly. They escorted him with a firm, painful pressure on his pressure points that forced him to walk or risk breaking his own arms. Oh, and Richard, Elena called out just as they reached the revolving doors. Richard twisted his head back, sweat pouring down his forehead. I canceled your health insurance this morning, Elena said, checking her nails. Try not to get hurt on the way out. American healthcare is very expensive for the unemployed. The guards shoved Richard and Sarah out onto the busy sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. Richard stumbled, falling onto his hands and knees. Passers-by stopped to look. A tourist took a photo. Humiliation burned his skin. He scrambled up, dusting off his suit, trying to regain a shred of dignity. He reached for his phone to call his lawyer, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped it. The screen shattered on the concrete. Inside the bank, Elena watched through the bulletproof glass. She did not smile. She simply turned back to Henderson. Liquidation phase 1 is complete, she said. Now, let's move to the real estate portfolio. I want his factory foreclosed by sunset. Yes, madam, Henderson said. And the mistress? Let her run for now, Elena said coldly. She will lead us to the rest of the rats. Hey guys, so sorry about the little interruption earlier. Just a small banking glitch. You know how these exclusive black cards can be fussy with security protocols. Sarah's voice was pitched an octave higher than normal. A desperate attempt to mask the panic vibrating in the air. She held her phone up, walking backward through the expansive living room of the penthouse, broadcasting live to her 50,000 followers. She forced a bright, plastic smile, tilting her head to catch the best lighting from the crystal chandelier. Behind her, Richard was frantically stuffing stacks of cash and luxury watches into a leather duffel bag. His hands were shaking so violently that he dropped a limited edition Rolex Daytona onto the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. Richard, stop making so much noise, Sarah hissed, covering the microphone with a manicured hand. You are ruining the aesthetic. Tell them we are packing for a surprise trip to the Maldives. Tell them. Shut up, Sarah, Richard snapped, not bothering to look up. The accounts are frozen. The credit lines are dead. We need liquid assets. Grab the jewelry box, now. The panic in his eyes was real. Richard Cross, the man who walked through life with the arrogance of a king, was now scurrying around his own home like a rat sensing a sinking ship. He ripped open the safe behind the painting, his breathing jagged and loud in the silent apartment. He grabbed a stack of bonds, shoving them into his pockets. He needed a safety net. He needed leverage. He did not understand how Elena had done it, but he knew he had to secure his capital before the lawyers got involved. Suddenly, a thunderous pounding echoed from the front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the authoritative, demand to be opened hammering of law enforcement. Open up NYPD and Marshal's service. Richard froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and aged. Sarah dropped her phone. It landed face up on the carpet, the live stream still running, capturing the ceiling and the terrified expressions of the couple. Before Richard could even move toward the intercom, the heavy oak doors were unlocked from the outside. The electronic lock beeped a sharp, confirming tone, a master override code that Richard did not possess. The doors swung open, revealing a wall of uniforms, 2 police officers, a U.S. Marshal, and at the front of the phalanx, Lucas, looking impeccable in a charcoal suit, holding a blue legal folder, and behind them, marching in with the fury of a hurricane, was Madeline Cross. Richard's mother was a woman who wore pearls like armor and viewed anyone with a net worth under $10 million as a separate, lower species. She pushed past the police officers, her cane tapping aggressively on the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" Madeline screeched, her voice cracking with indignation. "Richard, why are there armed men at my doorstep? Why is the doorman letting this rabble into the building?" "Mother, Richard stammered, stepping forward, dropping the duffel bag. "It's Elena. She's insane. She froze my accounts." "Elena." Madeline's face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. "That gutter rat, I told you she was trouble. I told you she was a gold digger waiting to show her true colors. Where is she? I will have her arrested for harassment." Madeline turned to the marshal, pointing a shaking finger at his chest. "You arrest that woman. She is stealing my son's money. This is his house. Get out. Or I will call the mayor. I had lunch with his wife last week." The marshal did not blink. He looked at Madeline with the bored patience of a man who dealt with delusional rich people every day. He stepped aside, allowing Lucas to walk forward. "Actually, Mrs. Cross," Lucas said, his voice smooth and projecting clearly across the room. "This is not your son's house. It never was." "Excuse me." Richard stepped up, trying to regain his alpha composure. I bought this penthouse 3 years ago. My name is on the deed. Correction. A cold voice cut through the tension. Elena stepped into the room. She walked slowly, deliberately, creating a vacuum of silence instantly. She was no longer wearing the white suit from the bank. She was now dressed in a sharp, black trench coat, looking like a grim reaper of finance. She stopped right in front of the dropped phone, looked down at the screen where comments were scrolling by at lightning speed, and then crushed it under the heel of her stiletto. The screen went black. "You did not buy this penthouse, Richard," Elena said, looking up at him. "You signed a lease agreement with a holding company called Aurora Properties. You thought it was a tax shelter set up by your CFO. In reality, Aurora Properties is a subsidiary of the Sterling Trust." She pulled a document from Lucas's folder and held it up. "I am your landlord, Richard, and you are 3 years behind on rent." That is a lie," Madeline shouted, rushing forward to slap Elena. "You ungrateful little leech, how dare you make up such stories?" Before Madeline's hand could make contact, a security guard caught her wrist midair. He didn't twist it. He just held it firmly, like an iron clamp, stopping the violence instantly. Madeline gasped, shocked that a servant dared to touch her. "Careful, Madeline," Elena said softly. "Assaulting a property owner is a felony. I would hate to see you spend your twilight years in a state penitentiary." Richard signed a corporate housing agreement, Lucas explained, handing a copy to the marshal. "The contract clearly states that the property is for the exclusive use of the CEO of Cross Enterprises, provided he remains in good moral standing. By engaging in public adultery and attempting to defraud the company actions, we have ample evidence of he has violated the morality clause. The lease is terminated. Immediately." "You can't kick us out," Sarah screamed, running to Richard's side. "I am pregnant. We have tenant rights. You have to give us 30 days' notice." Elena laughed. It was a terrifying sound. "Tenant rights apply to tenants. Sarah, you are not a tenant. You are a trespasser. And as for Richard, look at Clause 17. Richard snatched the paper. His eyes scanned the text frantically. His knees gave way. Clause 17. In the event of a breach of contract involving moral turpitude, the tenant agrees to immediate vacate and surrenders all personal property within the premises as collateral for unpaid rent. Collateral. Elena repeated the word, savoring it. "That means everything in this apartment now belongs to me. The furniture, the art, the clothes. And yes, Richard. Even that bag of cash you were trying to steal." "No," Richard roared, grabbing the bag. "This is my money. I earned it." "Seize it," the marshal ordered. 2 officers moved in. Richard tried to resist, clutching the bag to his chest. It was a pathetic struggle. They didn't beat him. They simply overwhelmed him with professional efficiency. One officer utilized a pressure point on Richard's shoulder, causing his arm to go numb. The bag dropped. Richard was spun around and handcuffed before he could take another breath. "You are arresting me," Richard screamed, his face pressed against the cold wall he used to think he owned. "For what? Being in my own house?" "For grand larceny," Elena answered, picking up the Rolex from the floor. "Taking assets from a foreclosed property is theft. Richard, you know the law. You used to use it to crush your competitors." "Mom, do something!" Richard yelled, looking at Madeline. Madeline was trembling, clutching her pearls, her face pale. She looked at Elena, then at the luxury apartment she had bragged about to her friends. The reality of the power shift was finally sinking in. "Elena," Madeline's voice wavered, shifting from aggressive to pleading. "We are family. You can't do this. Think of the scandal. People will talk." "Let them talk," Elena said coldly. I want them to talk. I want everyone in New York to know that the Cross family is nothing but a fraud. Elena turned to the marshal. Officer, I want these trespassers removed from my property. Now. With pleasure, ma'am. The marshal nodded. Wait! My shoes! My bag! Sarah shrieked as an officer grabbed her arm. I can't go out there without my shoes. You came into this relationship with nothing. Sarah, Elena said, signaling the officers to move. You will leave with nothing. Consider it a factory reset. The scene that followed was a masterclass in public humiliation. Richard, the arrogant CEO, was marched out in handcuffs, shoeless, his expensive shirt untucked. Sarah was wailing, being dragged along while trying to cover her face. Madeline hobbled behind them, muttering curses, stripped of her dignity. They were escorted not to the VIP elevator, but to the service elevator, the one used for garbage disposal. Down on the street. It was raining harder than the night before. The officers deposited them on the wet sidewalk. The heavy metal doors of the building slammed shut, the lock clicking with finality. Passers-by stopped. Phones came out. Flashbulbs popped. The paparazzi, tipped off by an anonymous source, Lucas, were waiting. Mr. Cross, is it true you're bankrupt? Mrs. Cross, why were you evicted? Who is the mystery woman inside? Richard huddled against the cold brick wall, shielding his face. He looked up at the penthouse window, 50 floors above. The lights were blazing. He saw a silhouette standing there, looking down, a glass of wine in hand. His phone, which was still in his pocket, buzzed. It was the only thing they left him. He pulled it out with trembling hands. A notification from the board of directors of Cross Enterprises. Subject: emergency meeting. Vote of no confidence. Time tomorrow, 800 hours. Location: Sterling Global Headquarters. Richard stared at the screen. Sterling Global Headquarters. Elena wasn't just taking his house. She was summoning him to her castle to execute him professionally. This isn't over, Madeline hissed, trying to use her soaking wet Chanel bag as an umbrella. Call your uncle in the Senate. Richard, call him now. I can't, Richard whispered, his voice broken. She owns the bank that funds his campaign. For the first time in his life, Richard Cross felt the true, crushing weight of absolute powerlessness. And up in the tower, Elena Sterling took a sip of the vintage wine Sarah had opened, savoring the taste of total victory. The electronic turnstile at the entrance of Cross Enterprises let out a sharp, dissonant buzz that echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. A red light flashed aggressively on the display panel. Access denied. Richard Cross stood frozen, his hand still holding the plastic ID badge near the scanner. He was wearing the same charcoal suit he had been arrested in the night before. It was wrinkled at the elbows and smelled faintly of rain and police station coffee. Around him, the morning rush of employees, people whose salaries he paid, people who used to tremble when he walked by, flowed around him like a river around a stone. They lowered their heads, averting their eyes, whispering behind raised hands. Try it again, Richard snapped at the young security guard stationed at the desk. Your system is garbage. Reset the gate. The guard, a man Richard had walked past for 5 years without ever learning his name, did not jump to obey. He did not apologize. He simply looked down at his monitor, typed something slowly, and then looked back up with a blank, professional expression. The system is functioning perfectly, Mr. Cross, the guard said, his voice loud enough for the nearby receptionists to hear. Your credentials have been deactivated by Human Resources. You are no longer authorized to enter the secure zone. Deactivated. Richard laughed, a high-pitched, incredulous sound that made a few people stop and stare. I am the CEO. I own this building. I own the servers. Open the gate before I fire you and make sure you never work in this city again. I am afraid that is not possible, sir. A smooth, mocking voice came from the elevator bank. Victor Vance, the chief operating officer and Richard's longtime rival, leaned against the chrome railing. He was wearing a pristine navy suit, looking fresh, rested, and distinctively smug. He held a Starbucks cup in one hand and tapped his phone with the other. Victor, Richard snarled, abandoning the turnstile to confront him. Did you authorize this? Is this your little coup attempt? Because if it is, I will bury you under so many lawsuits, your grandchildren will be born bankrupt. Me, oh no. Richard, I don't have that kind of power. Victor smirked, taking a slow sip of his coffee. But I did hear you had a rough night. Evicted, arrested, my God. The tabloids are calling it the fall of the cross. I thought you might take a personal day. I have a board meeting, Richard hissed, wiping sweat from his forehead. I need to get upstairs to explain the situation to the shareholders before the stock tanks. Oh, the meeting. Victor nodded, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Yes. It is starting in 10 minutes. And since you are technically a visitor now, I suppose I can sign you in. Consider it a professional courtesy. Victor waved his badge over the sensor. The gate beeped a pleasant green. Richard clenched his jaw, the humiliation burning in his chest like acid. He had to follow his subordinate through the gate, walking behind him like a chastised child. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was suffocating. Richard stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors. He looked haggard, desperate. He tried to smooth his hair, tried to straighten his tie, but the image staring back was that of a defeated man. Victor hummed a cheerful tune the entire way up, checking his stock portfolio on his phone. Still holding Cross Enterprises stock, Victor, Richard asked, trying to sound authoritative. You should sell. I am going to purge the board today. Actually, Victor chuckled, pocketing his phone as the doors opened. I sold everything yesterday morning, right before the price dropped 40%. Someone was buying up every share available. Lucky me. Richard stormed out of the elevator, marching toward the heavy mahogany double doors of the boardroom. His assistant, a young woman named Emily, was sitting at her desk outside. She didn't stand up. She didn't offer him coffee. She was busy shredding documents. Richard pushed the boardroom doors open with both hands, ready to shout, ready to command, ready to remind these old men who made them rich. Gentlemen, I apologize for the delay, but there has been a massive misunderstanding regarding— His voice died in his throat. The long conference table was full. The 12 board members sat in silence, their faces pale and serious. But it was the person at the head of the table, his seat, that stopped Richard's heart. Elena Sterling sat in the chairman's leather chair. She was not shouting. She was not gloating. She was reading a financial report, holding a gold fountain pen with elegant precision. Beside her stood Lucas, placing a fresh bottle of water on a coaster. You, Richard breathed, the word coming out as a strangled gasp. Get out of my chair. Elena did not look up immediately. She finished reading the paragraph, signed the bottom of the page, and closed the folder. The sound of the heavy cover slapping shut echoed in the silent room. Mr. Cross, Elena said, finally raising her eyes. Her gaze was devoid of any emotion, no anger, no love, just cold. Corporate calculation. You are late, and you are underdressed. This is a closed meeting for shareholders, Richard shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. Security. Why is this woman in here? Sit down, Richard. Old Mr. Galloway, the longest-serving board member, said quietly. He looked tired. She has the right to be here. What right? Richard demanded, looking around the room for support. She is a housewife. She knows nothing about this company. Display the cap table, Elena ordered softly. On the massive screen behind her, a pie chart appeared. A large blue section dominated the graphic. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Elena explained, standing up and walking slowly toward the screen. Sterling Global Investment Fund has acquired all outstanding debt of Cross Enterprises. We also executed a hostile takeover of the voting shares held by the three largest institutional investors. Combined with the shares I seized from you as collateral for your unpaid rent and debts, I currently control 51% of this company. 51%, Richard whispered. He felt the room spinning. That takes billions. You don't have that kind of liquid capital. I own the bank. Richard, Elena replied, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am the capital. She turned back to the board members. Gentlemen, the first item on the agenda is a motion to remove the current CEO for cause. The cause being gross negligence, moral turpitude, and the embezzlement of company funds for personal use. Embezzlement. Richard slammed his hands on the table. I never stole a dime. I built this company. Lucas stepped forward, placing a thick stack of papers in front of Richard. These are credit card statements. Mr. Cross, $2 million in jewelry, vacations, and luxury apartments for Ms. Sarah Miller, charged to the research and development account. That is federal fraud. The board members gasped. Even Victor Vance looked shocked at the brazenness of the theft. I can explain, Richard stammered, sweat pouring down his face. It was consulting fees. Sarah is a consultant. We have her testimony from this morning. Elena cut him off. She was quite cooperative when the police explained that she was facing 5 years in prison as an accomplice. She admitted everything to save herself. She said you forced her to sign the invoices. Richard felt the floor drop out from under him. Sarah had flipped. The rat had abandoned the ship and chewed a hole in the hull on her way out. All in favor of the motion to terminate Richard Cross. Effective immediately. Elena asked. 12 hands went up, including Victor Vance's. Victor. Richard looked at his rival, betrayed. Strictly business, Richard. Victor shrugged. I don't like jail. Motion passed. Elena slammed a gavel down. Richard Cross, you are fired. You are stripped of all titles, stock options, and benefits. Your golden parachute severance package is denied due to the criminal nature of your termination. You can't do this to me. Richard lunged forward. He didn't know what he intended to do, strangle her, beg her, shake her, but he needed to stop the nightmare. Before he could take 2 steps, the side door burst open. 4 large men in dark tactical suits entered. They were not the building security. They were private military contractors employed by Sterling Global. They intercepted Richard with terrifying efficiency. One grabbed his left arm, another his right. They twisted his arms behind his back, forcing his head down onto the polished mahogany table, his cheek pressed against the cold wood where he used to sign billion-dollar deals. Let him go, Elena ordered. The guards stepped back, but remained close, their presence a heavy threat. Richard scrambled up, adjusting his jacket, panting heavily. You think you have won? Richard spat, his eyes wild. I still have the patent, the Alpha Project, the new tech. It's in my head. Without me, this company is a hollow shell. Elena walked back to her chair and sat down. She looked at him with pity, the kind of pity one feels for a dying insect. The Alpha Project was developed by your engineering team, Richard. Elena said, specifically, by Dr. Eris. I had lunch with him yesterday. He was very unhappy with how you claimed credit for his work. He has already signed a new contract directly with me. The intellectual property stays. You go. She pointed to the door. Box up his personal effects. Elena told the guards. But inspect everything. If he tries to take a single paperclip that belongs to the company, call the police and add a petty theft charge to his indictment. You will regret this. Richard screamed as the guards grabbed his elbows again to drag him out. I am Richard Cross. I am this city. You are a liability, Elena said, turning her attention back to the documents. And I just wrote you off. The doors swung open. The entire floor of employees had gathered in the hallway. They watched in silence as their former tyrant was frog-marched toward the elevators. There was no applause, no booing, just a heavy, suffocating silence of judgment. Richard looked at their faces. He saw relief. He saw contempt. As the elevator doors closed on his screaming face, putting an end to his reign, Elena did not look up. Now, she said to the stunned room of board members, let's discuss the restructuring. Victor, you're fired too. Victor's smug smile vanished instantly. What? But I voted with you. You knew about the embezzlement and did nothing, Elena said, not bothering to look at him. Complicity is just as bad as the crime, security. Take him too. As Victor was dragged out, shouting protests, Elena finally allowed herself a small, cold smile. The boardroom was clean, but the war was far from over. She picked up her phone. A message was waiting from her private investigator. Subject: the pregnancy message. We have the medical records from the clinic Sarah visited. You are going to want to see this. The bitter wind of the New York harbor whipped down the alleyway, cutting through Richard Cross's thin, wrinkled suit jacket like a serrated knife. He huddled against the brick wall of a deli, counting the crumpled bills in his wallet for the third time. $40. The former CEO of a billion-dollar empire had exactly $40 to his name. Beside him, Sarah was shivering violently, her designer heels ruined by the grime of the sidewalk, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. You said you had an offshore account, Sarah hissed, her teeth chattering. She looked at him with undisguised loathing. You said you had a rainy day fund in the Cayman Islands. Was that a lie too? Richard. It wasn't a lie, Richard snapped, shoving the wallet back into his pocket. Elena's lawyers found it. They filed an international freeze order an hour ago. My contact at the bank hung up on me. That woman has tentacles everywhere. So what now? Sarah screamed, her voice cracking. We sleep on a bench. I am pregnant. Richard, do you understand your air is freezing to death? Richard looked at her stomach. For a fleeting second, a shadow of doubt crossed his eyes. She didn't look pregnant. She looked hungry and desperate. But he pushed the thought away. He needed her. She was the only person left who hadn't blocked his number. Give me the ring, Richard demanded, holding out his hand. Sarah clutched her left hand to her chest. The 10-carat diamond solitaire sparkled mockingly in the dim light. No, you gave this to me. It is mine. It is an asset, Richard growled, stepping closer, looming over her with menacing intent. We sell it. We get $50,000 cash from a fence. We buy tickets to Mexico. We start over. Give it to me. Or I will take it. Sarah hesitated, looking at the desperation in his eyes. She realized he was on the edge of violence. Slowly, reluctantly. She slid the ring off her finger. Richard snatched it, not even pausing to comfort her. There is a high-end reseller on 47th Street, Richard said, marching toward the Diamond District. He doesn't ask questions. He owes me a favor. The walk to the Diamond District was a gauntlet of paranoia. Every police siren made Richard jump. Every person looking at their phone seemed to be reading the headlines about his downfall. When they finally entered the discreet, velvet-lined office of Mr. Solkoff, the jeweler, Richard felt a wave of relief. Solkov, a heavy-set man with a magnifying loupe permanently attached to his eye, examined the ring under a bright halogen light. The silence in the room was suffocating. Richard tapped his fingers on the glass counter, the sound echoing like a ticking clock. Beautiful stone, Solkov murmured. VVS1 clarity, custom cut. Just give me a price, Solkov. Richard said impatiently. I am in a rush. Cash only? Solkov set the ring down. He looked up, his expression unreadable. I cannot buy this, Mr. Cross. Why not? Richard demanded. It is worth 200,000 retail. I am asking for 50. Because the serial number laser inscribed on the girdle of the diamond has been flagged, Solkov said, sliding the ring back across the counter. It was reported as stolen property in a global database 30 minutes ago. Stolen, Sarah shrieked. He bought it for me. Technically. A voice boomed from the doorway behind them. The company bought it. And since Richard was terminated for embezzlement, any item purchased with company funds is now considered stolen evidence. Richard spun around. The door burst open. It wasn't just a patrol officer. It was a tactical unit. 4 officers in heavy vests swarmed the small room. The impact of their boots on the floor vibrated through Richard's legs. Before he could utter a word of protest, he was slammed face first onto the glass counter. The cold surface pressed against his cheek, distorting his vision. Richard Cross, you are under arrest for grand larceny and trafficking in stolen goods, an officer shouted, wrenching Richard's arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound of finality that echoed in Richard's soul. I didn't steal it, Sarah cried as a female officer grabbed her. I am just the fiancé I didn't know. You are in possession of stolen property, ma'am, the officer replied coldly. You have the right to remain silent. The ride to the precinct was a blur of humiliation, but the true horror awaited them in the holding cell. It was a cage of concrete and steel, smelling of stale sweat and industrial disinfectant. Richard sat on the metal bench, his head in his hands. Sarah paced back and forth, sobbing about her reputation. 2 hours passed. Then, the heavy steel door of the interrogation room opened. Richard looked up, expecting a public defender. Instead, Elena walked in. She was radiant. The fluorescent lights of the police station seemed to dim in her presence. She wore a simple navy dress that screamed quiet luxury. Lucas stood behind her, holding a briefcase. She sat down opposite Richard, folding her hands on the table. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. You look terrible, Richard, Elena said calmly. Orange really isn't your color. Oh wait, you haven't been processed into prison jumpsuits yet. That comes tomorrow. You set us up, Richard spat, pulling at his cuffs. You flagged the ring. I was protecting my assets. Elena corrected him. Grand larceny carries a sentence of 5 to 15 years in New York. And since you crossed state lines with the intent to sell, we are looking at federal charges. Rikers Island is lovely this time of year. I hear. Sarah wailed, clutching the table. Elena, please, I am pregnant. You can't let me have a baby in prison. Elena's eyes flicked to Sarah. There was a moment of intense scrutiny, a gaze that seemed to x-ray Sarah's soul. Sarah flinched, looking away. I am not a monster, despite what you two believe, Elena said, leaning back. I am willing to drop the criminal charges. I will classify the theft as a civil debt dispute. But there is a condition. Anything, Richard said quickly. I will sign over my pension, my car, anything. You have nothing left to sign over. Richard. Elena smiled. I already took it all. No, this debt must be paid with labor. The judge has agreed to release you into my custody under a special restitution program. Lucas opened the briefcase and slid a contract across the table. What is this? Richard squinted at the document. Community service, Lucas explained. Specifically, urban beautification. You owe Sterling Global $100,000 for the ring and the legal fees. You will work it off at minimum wage. By my calculation, that is about 7,000 hours of labor. Labor? Richard asked, a knot forming in his stomach. What kind of labor? Cleaning, Elena said. The park directly across from Cross Enterprises, sorry. Sterling Tech has been neglected. I want it spotless. You start immediately. I am a CEO, Richard roared, standing up. I do not pick up trash. Then you go to prison, Elena said simply, standing up as well. Officer, take them to booking. The guard stepped forward. The sound of keys jingling was the only warning. Wait, Sarah screamed. I'll do it. I'll sign. Richard looked at Sarah, then at the guard, then at Elena's cold, unyielding face. He realized he had no leverage. He was a bug under her shoe. With a shaking hand, he picked up the pen. He signed his freedom away. 1 hour later, the midday sun beat down on the concrete pavement of the corporate plaza. It was lunchtime. Hundreds of employees from the surrounding skyscrapers were pouring out to grab food from the gourmet trucks lining the street. In the center of the park, Richard Cross and Sarah Miller stood wearing bright, neon orange vests. On the back, in bold black letters, read court-ordered community service, I stole from charity. Elena had added the charity detail as a creative flourish. Pick it up. Richard. A supervisor from the sanitation department barked. He was a short, stout man who clearly enjoyed ordering around a former millionaire. That cigarette butt isn't going to walk itself into the bag. Richard gripped the metal trash picker. His hands, used to holding crystal tumblers and fountain pens, were cramping. He stabbed at a greasy burger wrapper on the grass. Look, isn't that Mr. Cross? The whisper started as a ripple and turned into a wave. A group of junior analysts from his former company had stopped on the sidewalk. They were holding their phones up. Oh my God, it is him. A girl giggled. And his mistress. Look at the vests. Richard pulled the brim of his cap down, trying to hide his face, but there was nowhere to hide. He was on display, a zoo animal in a cage of his own making. Hey, Mr. Cross, a voice called out. It was Dave, a middle-aged accountant Richard had fired 3 years ago to cut costs. Dave was holding a half-eaten hot dog. You missed a spot over here. Dave tossed the hot dog wrapper onto the ground, right in front of Richard's feet. Richard froze. The wrapper lay there, stained with mustard, a symbol of absolute disrespect. He gripped the trash picker until his knuckles turned white. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through his veins. He wanted to swing the metal rod at Dave's smiling face. He wanted to scream. Pick it up, the supervisor warned. Stepping closer. Or I call the lady in the tower and tell her you are in breach of contract. Richard looked up, high above. On the 50th floor of the building that used to bear his name, he saw a solitary figure standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. Elena. She was watching. He could feel her gaze burning into him. Slowly, agonizingly. Richard bent down. His knees hit the dirt. He reached out with his gloved hand, not the tool, but his hand, and picked up the mustard-stained wrapper. Good boy, Dave laughed, snapping a photo. Sarah, who was spearing a soda can nearby, suddenly dropped her tool. She doubled over, clutching her stomach. Richard, she groaned. I don't feel well. The baby. Stop acting, Richard hissed, not looking at her. Keep working or they will send us to jail. No, really, Sarah gasped, her face turning pale. I need water. I feel faint. Get back to work, the supervisor shouted. No breaks for another 2 hours? Sarah looked at Richard, pleading for him to defend her, to be the man he used to be. But Richard just turned his back, stabbing aggressively at a piece of newspaper. He was broken. The man who would destroy the world for his ego was gone, replaced by a coward terrified of prison. At that moment, Sarah's eyes hardened. The fear in them was replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. She looked up at the tower, not with hatred, but with a sudden realization. Richard was a sinking ship, but Elena was the captain now. If Sarah wanted to survive, she needed to stop being Richard's accomplice and start being his prosecutor. High above, Elena turned away from the window. He picked up the trash. Elena said to Lucas, "He has no spine." "And the girl?" Lucas asked. "She looks like she is about to collapse." "She is faking," Elena replied, walking back to her desk. "Or at least, she is exaggerating. But let's push her a little harder. Release the video of her insulting the police officer to the press. Let's see how loyal she stays to Richard when the whole world hates her." "Madam Chairman," Lucas hesitated. "There is one issue. The board of the Charity Foundation is asking questions about the house seizure. They want a meeting." "Schedule it," Elena said. "But first, send a bottle of champagne to the sanitation supervisor. He is doing an excellent job." And we are back with a world exclusive. You saw the viral video of a pregnant woman being forced to pick up trash in Central Park by a billionaire heiress. Today, she is here to tell her side of the story. Please, welcome, Sarah Miller. The applause sign lit up in the studio of the Diane Sawyer show. But the audience did not clap enthusiastically. They offered a sympathetic, muted welcome. The kind reserved for survivors of terrible tragedies. I sat in my office on the top floor of Sterling Tower, watching the 60-inch ultra-high-definition screen mounted on the wall. Beside me, Lucas stood rigid, clutching a tablet that was displaying a rapidly plummeting graph of our public approval rating. Sarah walked onto the stage. She was a vision of calculated poverty. Gone were the Versace dresses and the Louboutin heels she had fought so hard to keep. She was wearing a simple, oversized gray cardigan that swallowed her frame, making her look fragile and petite. Her hair was down, devoid of styling products, framing a face that was devoid of makeup. She looked exhausted. She looked innocent. She looked like a masterpiece of public relations manipulation. "Thank you for having me, Diane," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling just enough to be audible. She sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching a tissue with both hands. "Sarah, let's get straight to it," the host said, leaning in with practiced concern. "The world sees you as the other woman, the homewrecker who destroyed a marriage, but you say that is not the truth." "It is not," Sarah said, looking directly into the camera. A single, perfect tear slid down her cheek. "I was just an assistant. Diane, I was 22 when I started working for Richard Cross. I came from a small town in Ohio. I had student loans. I had rent to pay. Richard, Mr. Cross. He was my boss. He was powerful. He told me that if I didn't do what he wanted, I would be fired. I would be blacklisted in the industry." I took a slow sip of my espresso. "She is good," I murmured. "She is rewriting history to turn herself into a victim of workplace harassment. It is a smart angle. The public loves a redemption arc." "Are you saying the relationship was non-consensual?" Diane asked, her eyes widening. "I am saying I had no choice." Sarah sobbed, covering her face. "He controlled everything, my finances, my apartment, my life. I wanted to leave so many times, but he threatened me. He said he would ruin me. And then, when I got pregnant, I thought maybe he would change. I thought he would finally protect me. But he didn't," Diane said softly. No. Sarah shook her head violently. When his wife, when Elena Sterling revealed who she really was, Richard threw me to the wolves. He tried to sell my engagement ring, the only thing I had to support my baby, to pay his debts. And then, she, Elena. Sarah paused for dramatic effect. The camera zoomed in on her trembling hands. What did Elena Sterling do? Diane prompted. She is a monster, Sarah whispered, her voice hardening with venom. She owns the bank. She owns the police. She came to the station and forced us to sign that slavery contract. She said if I didn't scrub the pavement on my hands and knees, she would have my baby taken away by Child Protective Services the moment it was born. Who does that? Who threatens an unborn child? The audience gasped. A collective sound of horror filled the studio. On the screen, the hashtag #BoycottSterling began to trend at #1 worldwide. That is a serious accusation, Diane said, looking grave. You are saying the chairwoman of Sterling Global is abusing her power to torture you. Look at me, Sarah cried, standing up and gesturing to her modest outfit. I have nothing. I am sleeping in a shelter. I am eating from soup kitchens. Meanwhile, she is sitting in her ivory tower, drinking champagne, laughing at my misery. She doesn't want justice. Diane, she wants revenge. She is a jealous, vindictive billionaire bullying a poor, pregnant single mother. I muted the television. The silence that followed was heavy. Madam Chairwoman, Lucas said, his voice tense. Stock in Sterling Global just dropped 4% in 10 minutes. Our PR department is being flooded with hate mail. The board is calling for an emergency statement. They want us to settle. They want us to pay her off to make this stop. Pay her? I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city that was currently judging me. If we pay her, we admit guilt. If we pay her, she wins. Sarah is counting on the fact that big corporations are terrified of bad publicity. She thinks I am a corporate suit who will write a check to make the noise go away. She is winning the narrative, Lucas pointed out. The public sees a pregnant girl in a cardigan. They don't see the woman who ordered bottle service while laughing at your eviction. Let her win the narrative for today, I said, turning back to him. Let her climb as high as she can. Let her become the face of the oppressed, because the higher she climbs, the more fatal the fall will be. I walked over to my desk and unlocked the top drawer. Inside was a small, encrypted USB drive. It contained the raw footage from the security cameras inside the penthouse. Not just the video of the eviction, but the archives. 3 years of archives. Where is Richard? I asked. He is currently at a Motel 6 in New Jersey, Lucas replied, checking his phone. He used the last of his cash to rent a room for 2 hours. We have a tail on him. He is watching the broadcast. In a cramped, dimly lit motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair, Richard Cross sat on the edge of a sagging mattress. His eyes were glued to the cracked screen of the television bolted to the wall. His hands were clenched into fists so tight that his fingernails drew blood from his palms. He forced me. Sarah's voice echoed from the TV speakers. He is a predator. Liar! Richard screamed at the screen. He grabbed the cheap plastic ashtray from the nightstand and hurled it. It struck the TV, cracking the plastic casing but failing to stop the image of Sarah's tear-streaked face. I gave you everything. I bought you that apartment. You begged me to leave Elena. You said she was a boring, frigid liability. Richard stood up and paced the small room like a caged animal. He had been betrayed by his board. He had been destroyed by his wife. And now, the one person he thought was his ally, the woman he had ruined his life for, was selling him out to save her own skin. She is painting me as a monster to get sympathy, Richard muttered, his mind racing. She wants a book deal. She wants a settlement. She is going to walk away with millions while I rot in the gutter. He reached for his phone, a cheap prepaid burner he had bought at a gas station. He dialed Sarah's number. He knew she wouldn't answer, but he needed to leave a message. He needed her to know that he wasn't dead yet. Voicemail, the robotic voice announced. You think you are smart, Sarah? Richard hissed into the phone, his voice shaking with a cold, murderous rage. You think you can pin this all on me? I know about the clinic. Sarah, I know about the dates. You think I didn't keep the receipts? You are playing a dangerous game. And if I go down, I am taking you with me. Watch your back. He hung up and threw the phone onto the bed. He needed a drink. He needed a lawyer. But he had neither. He walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at his reflection in the dirty mirror. The handsome, confident CEO was gone. Staring back was a desperate, hollow man with nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. Back in the Sterling Tower, the atmosphere was electric with tension. My executive team was gathered in the conference room, looking pale and terrified. We have protesters gathering in the lobby, the head of security reported. They are holding signs that say, "Justice for Sarah and eat the rich." We advise you to leave via the helipad. I am not going anywhere, I said, sitting at the head of the table. Lucas, connect me to the producers of the Diane Sawyer show. Tell them I want to exercise my right of reply. Tell them I will appear on the show tomorrow morning. Live. Madam, are you sure? The PR director asked, looking horrified. Going on live TV with a hostile host is suicide. They will ambush you. They will have Sarah there to cry on cue. I want Sarah there, I said, a small predatory smile playing on my lips. In fact, I insist on it. Tell them I will bring a settlement offer. That will guarantee they tune in. A settlement. Lucas looked at me, confused. But you just said... I said tell them I will bring an offer. I corrected him. I didn't say what kind of offer. I picked up the USB drive and tossed it to Lucas. Edit this, I ordered. I want a 3-minute compilation. Focus on the dates, December 24th, February 14th, and specifically, last week, the day before the eviction. Make sure the audio is crystal clear. I want the world to hear exactly how scared Sarah was of Richard. Lucas plugged the drive into his laptop. He opened the first file. The video played. It showed the interior of the penthouse. Sarah was standing over Richard, who was sitting in a chair looking tired. Video audio. Buy me the emerald necklace. Richard, I don't care if the company is struggling. Fire some people cut their pensions. I want that necklace. If you don't get it, I will tell your wife about us. Lucas's eyes widened. He clicked on the next file. Video audio. I hate pretending to be nice to your mother when she dies. We can turn her estate into a spa. God, why does she take so long to die? And the final clip, the one from the day of the eviction. Video audio. Look at this ultrasound. Richard, it is fake. You idiot. I bought it online for $50. But it is enough to trap you. Now sign the prenup or I walk. The room went silent. The PR director's jaw was practically on the table. She isn't a victim, Lucas whispered. She is the architect. Precisely, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. Sarah Miller wants to be a star. She wants the world to watch her. So let's give her what she wants. Tomorrow morning, we are going to host the most viewable execution in television history. I walked to the window and looked down at the protesters below. They were angry. They were passionate. They were fighting for a lie. Lucas, I said, call the legal department, draft a defamation lawsuit, and call the district attorney. Tell him I have new evidence regarding the pregnancy fraud. By this time tomorrow, Sarah won't be signing autographs. She will be signing a confession. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I knew who it was. Message you win. Help me destroy her, and I will disappear. It was Richard. The rat was trying to switch sides again. I typed a reply. Response. The enemy of my enemy is still my enemy, but you can be a useful tool. Meet my lawyer at the back entrance of the studio tomorrow at 7 a.m. Don't be late. I put the phone away. The stage was set. The players were in position. Get some sleep, everyone. I told my team, tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. Please welcome the woman the internet is calling the Ice Queen of Wall Street, Elena Sterling. Diane Hayes, the host of the nation's highest-rated morning talk show, gestured toward the velvet curtains. The studio audience did not applaud. Instead, a low, rumbling sound of disapproval filled the air. It was a wall of sound, heavy with judgment and hostility. Some people stood up, holding handmade signs that read, "Justice for Sarah" and "Mothers Against Monsters." I walked onto the stage. I did not wave. I did not smile. I walked with the steady, rhythmic cadence of a soldier entering a battlefield. I wore a crimson-red suit, the color of power, the color of warning. I sat in the leather armchair opposite Sarah, crossing my legs elegantly. Sarah recoiled as if I were radioactive. She pulled her oversized gray cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Shrinking into the sofa, she looked at the audience with wide, fearful eyes, silently begging them for protection. "Ms. Sterling," Diane began, her voice dripping with journalistic aggression. "You are facing a public relations nightmare. Millions of people believe you are using your wealth to bully a pregnant woman. How do you respond to the allegations that you forced Ms. Miller to perform manual labor while she was carrying a child?" "I respond with facts," I said. My voice was calm, deep, and projected clearly through the studio without a hint of tremors. "But before we discuss facts, I want to address the settlement offer." Sarah's head snapped up. The word settlement acted like a shot of adrenaline. The fear in her eyes was instantly replaced by a flash of greed that she tried, and failed, to hide. "You want to settle?" Diane asked, surprised. "You are admitting guilt." "I am admitting that I value my time more than my money," I replied, placing a black leather checkbook on the glass coffee table. "This has become a distraction for my company, so I am prepared to end it today." I looked directly at Sarah. "How much? Sarah, what is the price of your pain?" Sarah sat up straighter. She glanced at Diane, then back at me. She licked her lips. "It is not about the money. It is about security for my baby. I need a house. I need medical care." "Give me a number," I interrupted. "I do not negotiate with ambiguous terms." $10 million, Sarah said. The audience gasped. Even Diane looked taken aback by the magnitude of the demand. $10 million? And a public apology. "Done," I said instantly. I opened the checkbook. I uncapped my pen. Sarah's eyes widened. She had expected a fight. She had expected a negotiation. She did not expect a surrender. She leaned forward. Her eyes locked on the tip of my pen as it hovered over the paper. She was practically salivating. "However," I paused. Looking up. "There is one condition, a standard clause in all my settlements. Before I hand over this check for $10 million, we must review the evidence of relationship to verify the claim. It is just a formality. A short video clip from my home security system." "I don't want to see any videos," Sarah stammered, sensing a trap. "I just want the check. The audience wants to see the truth." "Doesn't it?" I asked, turning to the crowd. "Show it," a man in the front row shouted. The mob mentality shifted. They wanted drama. They wanted content. "Roll the tape," I ordered, pointing to the massive LED screen behind us. The studio lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. The date stamp in the corner read, October 14th, 1100 hours. The image was crystal clear. It showed the master bedroom of the penthouse. Sarah was standing by the mirror, stuffing a pillow under her dress. She was not crying. She was laughing. She was talking on the phone. Yeah, Mom, I got him. Sarah's voice on the video was loud and mocking. The idiot thinks I am 3 months pregnant. I bought a fake ultrasound on eBay for $50. He didn't even check the name on the scan. Richard is so desperate for an heir he would believe anything. The studio went silent, deathly silent. On the screen, the video cut to another clip. Sarah was throwing a vase at Richard. Sign the checks. Richard, I don't care if you go to jail. I want that villa in France. If you don't buy it, I will tell the police you hit me. Who are they going to believe, the crying pregnant girl or the rich abusive husband? The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the studio was shattered by the sound of my pen capping shut. I put the checkbook back into my pocket. It appears, I said, my voice cutting through the shock, that the pregnancy is a medical miracle. It consists entirely of goose feathers and polyester. Sarah was frozen. Her face had drained of all color. She looked like a ghost. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at the audience. The sympathy was gone. In its place was a collective, burning rage. They had been played, and the American public hates nothing more than being played. That is deepfake, Sarah shrieked, standing up. She doctored it. It is AI. It is not real. It is very real. A male voice spoke from the shadows of the stage wing. Sarah spun around. Richard Cross stepped into the light. He looked terrible. His suit was cheap. His face was unshaven, and his eyes were hollow, but his focus was laser sharp. He walked to the center of the stage, ignoring me, and locked eyes with Sarah. Richard, Sarah whispered, what are you doing here? I am here to corroborate the evidence, Richard said into his lapel microphone. I was the one who recorded the second clip. Sarah, I installed a backup camera you didn't know about. I was saving it for divorce court, but I never thought I would use it to save my wife. Ex-wife, I corrected him from my chair. You traitor, Sarah hissed, her hands curled into claws. The facade of the fragile victim evaporated completely. The street-fighting survivalist emerged. I did this for us. I lied for us. You lied for yourself, Richard said, his voice flat. You are going to take the $10 million and leave me to rot. I heard the voicemail you left your mother. You are useless, Sarah screamed. She lunged. It happened fast. Sarah threw herself at Richard, her nails aiming for his eyes. She didn't look like a pregnant woman. She moved with the agility of a desperate predator. She struck Richard in the face, scratching his cheek, drawing a line of red. Richard didn't fight back. He simply raised his arms to shield his face, letting her attack him. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was letting the cameras capture the assault. Security! Diane shouted, backing away. 2 uniformed police officers, who had been waiting in the wings at my request, rushed onto the stage. They didn't treat Sarah gently. They grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back. Get off me, Sarah yelled, kicking and thrashing. I am pregnant. You can't touch me. We saw the pillow, ma'am, one officer said, snapping the handcuffs onto her wrists. Sarah Miller, you are under arrest for attempted extortion, fraud, and assault. You have the right to remain silent, although I doubt you will use it. As they dragged her away, Sarah looked back at me. Her eyes were wide with the realization of total defeat. Elena, she begged, help me, please, You were just leaving, I said. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. The audience erupted. But this time, they weren't booing me. They were cheering. They were clapping for the justice they had just witnessed. It was a chaotic, noisy standing ovation. Diane Hayes, ever the opportunist, turned to the camera. "We will be right back after this commercial break. Do not go anywhere." The red light on the camera turned off. The stage cleared. Richard stood there, touching the scratch on his face. He looked at me, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He thought he had earned his redemption. He thought we were a team again. "We did it," Richard said, walking toward me. "We destroyed her. Elena, I am sorry for everything. Maybe we can start over. I can work my way up. I can earn your trust back." I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles on my red suit. I looked at him with the same indifference I would show a discarded wrapper. "You served your purpose, Richard," I said. "You are an excellent witness, but do not mistake utility for forgiveness." "What do you mean?" Richard asked, his smile faltering. "You admitted to recording her without her consent," I pointed out. "In the state of New York, that is a felony if used for blackmail. And you just confessed to it on national television." Two large men in white medical uniforms appeared from behind the curtain. They weren't police. They were orderlies. "Who are they?" Richard backed away. "You have been under a lot of stress, Richard," I said, signaling the orderlies. "The public breakdown, the loss of your company, and now, being attacked by your lover. It is clear to everyone that you are mentally unstable. You need help. You need rest." "I am not crazy," Richard said, his voice rising in panic. "Elena, what are you doing?" "I am exercising my power of attorney," I replied. "You signed it 10 years ago when we first got married, in case of medical emergencies. You never revoked it. I am committing you to the Sterling Mental Health Facility for a 72-hour observation period, for your own safety, of course." "No," Richard screamed as the orderlies grabbed him. "No, you can't do this. I helped you, and I am helping you," I whispered as they injected a sedative into his neck. "I am helping you disappear." Richard's eyes rolled back. His knees gave way. The orderlies caught him before he hit the floor. "Take him via the rear exit," I instructed. "Avoid the paparazzi. I want his admission to be private." As they carried my ex-husband away like a sack of laundry, I turned to Lucas, who was waiting with my coat. "The car is ready, madam," Lucas said. "Where to?" "The office," I said, putting on my sunglasses. "We have a company to rebuild. And Lucas—" "Yes, madam." "Send flowers to Diane Hayes. Tell her thanks for the airtime. Create 20 titles with the first letter of each word in capital letters for a 100-letter YouTube video's English, then translate into Vietnamese below. You must translate the English title below when you finish writing a title. Guarantee the correct plot, correct speaking style, shock, tension, drama, curiosity. Extremely high. Do not state the result. Ensure the shock and struggle right from the first words, and the viewer still understands the story in the entire script. Remove the word shock at the beginning of the sentence. The opening must be with a sentence describing the shock of what exactly must be received, including the roles of the speaker and the receiver, so that the listener can easily understand. Then explain the brief context. Emphasize who is the listener for victim, so that the viewer can immediately see the blow between the two roles and understand the context of the story. Be brave and do not write the character's name, but write the character's role. For example, my parents, sister, husband, wife, or something similar. If there is a line that shows dramatic tension, select it. If there is, do not write the line if it is not appropriate. If you write, You must state the role of that person and the recipient so that the listener can easily understand it. All first letters should be capitalized. But if you want to emphasize, capitalize the entire word or add accents to emphasize it. The heavy oak doors of the Manhattan Criminal Court were closed, sealing the fate of Sarah Miller inside courtroom 3. The air in the room was thick, smelling of floor wax and desperation. I sat in the back row, wearing a black veil that concealed my expression, though everyone knew exactly who I was. Beside me, Senator William Cross sat like a stone statue. He was sweating. Despite the aggressive air conditioning, he knew that one wrong move, one word of support for Sarah, and I would release the documents that would send him to federal prison. Your Honor, I ask for compassion. Sarah's defense attorney pleaded, gesturing to his client. Sarah sat at the defendant's table. She was playing the role of the martyr perfectly. She wore a loose, white maternity dress that emphasized the small bump of her stomach. Her hair was pulled back in a modest ponytail. She had no makeup on, leaving her face pale and drawn. She kept one hand protectively over her belly, looking at the jury with wide, tear-filled eyes. My client made mistakes, the lawyer continued, his voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity. She was a young woman in love with a powerful CEO. She was manipulated. And now, she carries the heir to the Cross family legacy. Sending a pregnant woman to a maximum security prison is not justice, it is cruelty. We ask for house arrest until the child is born. The jury whispered. I could see the sympathy in their eyes. They looked at the pregnant belly and forgot about the fraud. They forgot about the lies. The prosecution rests, the district attorney said. Looking frustrated, he knew the mother card was a strong defense. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with a reputation for zero tolerance, looked down at Sarah. Ms. Miller, do you have anything to say before sentencing? Sarah stood up slowly, wincing as if in pain. Your Honor, she whispered, her voice trembling. I just want to be a good mother. Richard abandoned us. His family abandoned us. But this baby is innocent. He is the last of the Cross bloodline. Please, don't punish my son for my sins. She looked directly at Senator Cross in the back row. Uncle William, she sobbed. Please, tell them this is Richard's son. Tell them you won't let your grandnephew be born behind bars. Every head in the courtroom turned to the senator. The pressure was immense. Sarah was banking on his family pride. She thought he would never let a Cross be born in a cell. William Cross gripped the armrests of his chair until his knuckles turned white. He looked at me. I didn't say a word. I just tapped my finger on my leather handbag, where the flight logs to the Cayman Islands were stored. William looked back at Sarah. He took a deep breath. Then, he looked away, staring straight ahead at the judge. He said nothing. Sarah's face crumbled. The betrayal was a physical blow. If the family has no statement, Judge Harrison said, reaching for her gavel, I am ready to deliver the sentence. Wait. The voice rang out from the back of the room. I stood up. I removed the veil. Mistress Sterling. Judge Harrison frowned. This is a criminal sentencing? You are a victim in the civil suit, but you have no standing to interrupt. I have new evidence, Your Honor, I said. Walking into the aisle, evidence that directly impacts the defense's argument regarding the paternity of the child. The defense claims leniency is required because the child is the heir to the Cross estate. If that premise is false, the argument for house arrest is void. False! Sarah shrieked, spinning around. How dare you? I was with Richard for 3 years. Of course it is his. I would like to call a witness, I said, signaling the bailiff. Mr. Michael Santoro. The side door opened. A man walked in. He was not wearing a suit. He wore a tight black t-shirt that showed off his tattoos and distressed jeans. He looked out of place, like a shark in a goldfish bowl. He walked with a swagger. Chewing gum. Sarah froze. Her eyes bulged. She recognized him. Mike, she whispered. The color drained from her face faster than water down a drain. Mr. Santoro, I said, stepping aside. Please state your occupation and your relationship to the defendant. I am a bartender at the Blue Velvet Lounge in Queens, Mike said, leaning against the witness stand. He winked at Sarah. And yeah, I know Sarah. We, got to know each other pretty well about 4 months ago. 4 months ago, I repeated. That would be the exact week of conception, according to the medical records. Objection. Sarah's lawyer jumped up. This is hearsay. This man is a plant. I have receipts. Mike shrugged, pulling a phone from his pocket. She was mad at her sugar daddy, sorry. Mr. Cross because he wouldn't buy her some necklace. She came to my bar. She drank 5 tequilas. She said she wanted to do something that would really screw him over. So, she screwed me instead. The courtroom erupted. The jury members gasped. The judge banged her gavel, demanding order. Liar! Sarah screamed, her voice losing its soft, victimized tone. You paid him. Elena paid him to say this. Mr. Santoro, I continued, ignoring her. Did Ms. Miller tell you she was using protection? She said she was on the pill. Mike replied. Guess she forgot to mention she stopped taking it so she could trap the rich guy. That is enough, Sarah's lawyer shouted. Without a paternity test, this is just slander. I am glad you brought that up, I said, pulling a sealed envelope from my bag. Since Mr. Cross is currently unavailable due to his mental health confinement, I authorized a prenatal DNA test using the amniotic fluid sample taken during Ms. Miller's checkup at the prison hospital yesterday. Sarah stopped screaming. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. I didn't authorize that, she hissed. The court authorized it, I said, handing the envelope to the bailiff. Under the suspicion of inheritance fraud, the bailiff handed the envelope to Judge Harrison. The room was deadly silent. The only sound was the ripping of paper. Judge Harrison put on her glasses. She read the document. Her expression changed from neutral to disgusted. The results state, Judge Harrison read aloud, her voice echoing off the walls, that the probability of Richard Cross being the father is 0%. She looked up at Mike. The probability of Michael Santoro being the biological father is 99.9%. Sarah collapsed into her chair. The game was up. The Cross heir was actually the son of a bartender from Queens. The golden ticket had just turned into a meaningless piece of paper. Senator Cross let out a long breath. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. I had just saved his family legacy from being polluted, even if I had destroyed his nephew to do it. Ms. Miller, Judge Harrison said, taking off her glasses. Her voice was cold steel. You have perjured yourself. You have attempted to defraud a family. You have used an unborn child as a bargaining chip for a reduced sentence. This court finds your behavior repugnant. No. Sarah stood up, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time. I didn't mean to. I just wanted a better life. Elena drove me to it. She is the villain. Look at her. She is laughing. I was not laughing. I was watching her with the blank expression of an executioner pulling the lever. Sarah Miller, the judge announced, on the counts of grand larceny, extortion, fraud, and perjury, I sentence you to the maximum penalty allowed by New York state law. You are sentenced to 10 years in a federal correctional facility. You will be transferred immediately. 10 years! Sarah screamed. No, I have a baby. You can't take my baby. The child will be placed in foster care upon birth. The judge ruled, unless the biological father wishes to claim custody. Everyone looked at Mike. Mike raised his hands in surrender. Whoa, lady, I live in a studio apartment. I can't raise a kid. Then the state will take custody. The judge banged the gavel. Case closed. Elena? Sarah shrieked as the bailiffs grabbed her. She lunged toward me, her face twisted and ugly. Raw hatred. You ruin my life. You witch, I will kill you. I will kill you. They dragged her out. Her screams echoed down the hallway long after the doors swung shut. I will kill you. It was the same threat Richard had made. Now, they were both gone. I turned to Senator Cross. He stood up slowly, adjusting his suit jacket. You are a terrifying woman, Elena, he whispered. And you are a retired senator, I corrected him. Excuse me. I want your resignation on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I said, putting on my sunglasses. Or I release the Cayman files anyway. We had a deal, William hissed. I abandoned Richard. That was the price for keeping the files secret today. I smiled. The price for keeping them secret forever is your seat. I have a friend who wants to run for Senate. She needs a vacancy. I walked away, leaving the most powerful man in Washington standing speechless in the middle of the courtroom. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun of New York City. The paparazzi were waiting. The cameras flashed. I didn't hide. I walked straight to my Rolls Royce. Lucas opened the door. It is done, madam, Lucas asked. Sarah is gone, I said, sliding into the seat. Richard is gone. The senator is finished. What is next? Drive, I said, looking at the skyline that I now owned completely. I need a vacation. And Lucas? Yes, madam. Find out if the bartender wants a job. He was honest. I like honest people. 1 year later, the champagne in the crystal flute bubbled with a golden effervescence that matched the lights of the Manhattan skyline below. I stood on the open-air terrace of the newly christened Sterling Spire, a 100-story glass needle that had pierced the heart of the financial district. It stood exactly where the old Cross Enterprises building had once been. I had not just renovated the old structure, I had demolished it, pulverized the concrete, and built something taller, sharper, and infinitely more expensive on top of its grave. Madam Chairwoman, a voice spoke from behind me. It was not Lucas. Lucas had been promoted to CEO of my European division in Zurich. This was my new personal assistant. A young Harvard graduate named Chloe, who looked at me with a mixture of terror and worship. The helicopter is fueled and waiting on the pad. The engines are running. Thank you, Chloe, I said, taking a final sip of the vintage Dom Perignon. Tell the pilot I will be there in 5 minutes. I have one final appointment to keep before we fly to Paris. Of course, Chloe nodded, checking her tablet. The appointment at the Serenity Institute. Are you sure you want to go alone? The patient? He has been volatile this week. I am sure, I replied, setting the glass on the railing. Ghosts cannot hurt the living, Chloe. They can only haunt themselves. I walked through the crowd of dignitaries, politicians, and tech moguls who were celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Sterling Global's total market dominance. They parted for me like the Red Sea. I saw Senator William Cross in the corner, holding a drink with a shaking hand. He had aged 20 years in 12 months. He caught my eye and immediately looked down. Terrified that I might change my mind about his pension, I took the private elevator down to the basement garage where the black armored SUV was waiting. The drive to upstate New York took 45 minutes. The Serenity Institute was not a prison in the traditional sense. It was a sprawling, white-walled fortress hidden in the Catskill Mountains, reserved for the mentally unstable members of the ultra-wealthy elite. It was a place where billionaires sent their problems to disappear. The director of the institute met me at the secure entrance. He was sweating. Everyone seemed to sweat when I was around these days. Ms. Sterling, he bowed. We were not expecting you until next month for the annual review. I was in the neighborhood. I lied. The truth was, today was the anniversary of the day Richard threw the divorce papers at my face. I wanted to see how he was celebrating. Take me to Ward C, Room 4. Mr. Cross is having a bad day, the director warned as he scanned his badge to open the heavy steel doors. He refuses to eat. He spends hours talking to the wall. He believes he is still running a company. Open it, I ordered. The door to room 4 slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The room was entirely white. The floors were padded. The walls were soft. There were no sharp edges. No hard surfaces. Nothing that could be used as a weapon. Richard Cross sat in the center of the floor. He was wearing white cotton scrubs. His hair, once styled with $100 gel, was long, matted, and gray. He was thin, his cheekbones protruding sharply against his pale skin. He was using a broken blue crayon to scribble frantically on the padded floor. Profit margins, Richard muttered, his voice raspy and frantic. If we cut the R&D budget by 10%, yes, then we can buy the island. Sarah needs the island. No, not Sarah. Elena. No. Who needs the island? He stopped writing. He looked at the blue line he had drawn. He looked at his hand. Richard, I said softly. Richard froze. He turned his head slowly, like a rusted machine. His eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, there was nothing but madness. And then, a spark of recognition flickered in the darkness of his pupils. Elena, he whispered. He scrambled to his feet. Stumbling over his own legs, he rushed toward me but stopped 3 feet away, conditioned by the invisible barrier of his confinement. Elena, you came back. I knew you would come back. He tried to smooth his hair down. He straightened his scrub top as if it were an Armani suit. Did you bring the check? Richard asked, his eyes wide with manic hope. The merger. We need to sign the merger. I have the papers right here. He gestured to the empty floor. I told the board we shouldn't sell, but if the price is right, there is no company. Richard, I said, my voice devoid of pity. Cross Enterprises was liquidated 365 days ago. The building is gone. The name is erased. Richard blinked. His face twitched. No, that is a lie. Victor said we are just restructuring. Where is Victor? Victor is in the room next door. I pointed out. He thinks he is a teapot. I heard him whistling when I walked in. Richard let out a short, hysterical laugh. Victor is a teapot. Yes, that makes sense. He always was a bit steaming. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Elena, you have to get me out of here. The service is terrible. The food. It tastes like ash. And the people. They don't know who I am. They treat me like a gardener. The word hung in the air. Gardener. Funny you should mention gardeners, I said. Reaching into my Hermes bag, I pulled out a glossy photograph. I have some news about Sarah. Richard flinched at the name. Sarah. That traitor. She is in jail. You put her there. She is in jail, I confirmed. But before she went in, she gave birth. A baby boy. Richard's eyes lit up. The primal instinct of legacy kicked in, cutting through the insanity. A boy. My son. I have a son. Not your son. Richard. I corrected him, holding the photo up against the glass partition. The DNA test was quite clear. The father was the bartender. Mike. Richard stared at the photo. It showed a chubby baby boy sitting on a patch of grass, holding a plastic shovel. However, I continued, enjoying the way Richard's face was crumbling. Mike didn't want the baby, and Sarah is serving 10 years. So, the state looked for a foster home. I decided to intervene. I pulled some strings. You took him, Richard gasped. You are raising him. Heavens no, I laughed. I don't have time for children, but I knew someone who was looking for a child, someone responsible, someone you know very well. Who? Richard whispered. Do you remember Jose? I asked, the head gardener at our Hamptons estate. The one you fired because you said he smelled like dirt and didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. Richard nodded dumbly. Jose adopted the boy, I said, putting the photo away. He named him Jose Jr. He is raising him to be a gardener. Richard, your heir, the flesh and blood of the woman you destroyed your life for, is currently learning how to prune rose bushes in New Jersey. And he will grow up hating the name Cross, because his new father will tell him exactly what kind of man you were. The scream that ripped from Richard's throat was not human. It was the sound of a soul being torn in half. He threw himself against the glass partition, clawing at it with his fingernails. No, Richard howled. He is mine. He is a king. You can't make him a servant. You can't. It is already done, I said, turning my back on him. Poetic justice is the only luxury I allow myself these days. Elena! Richard screamed, banging his head against the glass. Don't leave me. Please, I will do anything. I will be the gardener. Let me out. I am Richard Cross. I am Richard Cross. Goodbye, Richard, I said, signaling the director to close the door. The heavy steel slid shut, cutting off the screams instantly. Silence returned to the hallway. The director looked pale. I increase his dosage, I said as I walked toward the exit. He seems agitated. I don't want him hurting himself. He has a very long life ahead of him. I walked out into the cool mountain air. The wind whipped my hair back. The black helicopter was waiting on the pad, its rotors slicing through the air with a rhythmic thump, thump, thump that sounded like the heartbeat of a giant beast. Standing by the open door of the helicopter was a man. He was tall, with broad shoulders and eyes the color of the North Sea. He wore a suit that cost more than Richard's entire life earnings. This was Julian, the Duke of Savoy, and the owner of the largest private banking conglomerate in Europe. My merger partner, in business, and recently, in pleasure. He stepped forward and took my hand, helping me up the steps. His grip was firm, warm, and respectful. He didn't treat me like a trophy. He treated me like a nuclear weapon that he was lucky to be holding. Is it finished? Julian asked, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated against my chest. It is finished, I replied. Buckling my seatbelt, I looked down at the white building one last time as we lifted off. From the air, the Serenity Institute looked like a small white box. Inside that box was a man who had once thought he owned the world. Now, he was just a ghost in a padded cell, screaming at a wall. While his legacy was being pruned by the very hands he had scorned, I leaned back, resting my head on Julian's shoulder. He handed me a tablet. The acquisition of the Tokyo Exchange is complete, Julian said. They surrendered 5 minutes ago. You now control the Asian markets. Good, I smiled. Looking at the numbers, start the file on London. I want to buy Big Ben by Christmas. The helicopter banked left, turning toward the glittering horizon of New York City. My city, my empire. The ashes of the past were far behind me, and the future was paved with gold. I was no longer just a wife. I was no longer just a victim. I was the storm that had cleansed the earth. And now, I was the sun that ruled the sky.